Hello and welcome to Until Saturday, the Athletics College Football Podcast. I am David Ubben, hopefully not a new asthmatic after inhaling lots of smoke at Neyland Stadium last night, and now a four-time field storming survivor for my last four games. I don't know what's going on.
I'm Chris Vannini, freshly washed off from all those water bottles Texas fans were throwing on the field. Please make sure you recycle. It's very important.
And I'm Damien Harris, former Alabama running back, and I certainly will be wearing a lot of orange this week because I lost a lot of bets. So go me.
Damien would have never let that happen. It took a few weeks, guys, but it appears that the Georgia Death Star is back, fully operational. Look out. What does Darth Smart and the Bulldogs win over number one Texas mean for the SEC's picture and the playoff picture? We're going to talk about that. And our guy Sig Nasty and the Hoosiers hammer Nebraska, drop a 50 burger in Bloomington. They got College Game Day on the way this week. The quarterback hurt, but we'll see. The big question is, has Sig Nasty got himself a playoff team? I think so. Maybe. Speaking of playoff teams, is Alabama one? Is there a road for the Tide? And Tennessee is the latest team to really expose some issues for the Tide. We're going to talk a lot about that and what Nico Iamaleava and Dylan Sampson were able to do in a big-time atmosphere on Saturday night. Miami also did their thing, got in a shootout with Louisville, but survived, dropped another 50 points on the board. Plus, Oklahoma, it's gone from bad to ugly to worse. The same is true for Auburn, Florida State, USC, but who's the worst of the worst? And we're going to look at Chris's playoff bracket. What does that look like with his athletic 134 and all that and more? We got a packed show today. A lot happened this weekend. But guys, we're going to start. We got to address the Death Star. Georgia's back. I couldn't believe it in our midseason playoff picks for all of our athletic college football staff. There's 30 of us, and one person who might be on this podcast, who might be talking right now, picked Georgia to win the national championship. And when I looked around, I said, that's still probably the best team in the country. Chris, you were in the house for this game. Before we get to the game, what was your DKR experience like?
Yeah, so you took some heat, Ubben, on last week's show for
people can be wrong. It's fine.
Downplaying the atmosphere of Texas.
Because it's not great, but that's fine.
It used to be a wine and cheese crowd. How rowdy is it? All that kind of stuff.
It is a wine and cheese crowd. It's not that rowdy, but go ahead.
It was my first game there. The party, everything outside the stadium, really cool setup.
Yeah.
In the stadium, my big complaint is it's way too much like an NBA game. It's nonstop music blaring and showing everybody on the scoreboard and stuff like that. I barely heard the band at all. It didn't feel like a college football game.
Mm-hmm.
It was plenty loud, especially at certain moments. The game obviously didn't go the way they wanted. I'd say it was like a solid crowd, but it didn't live up to some of the better ones. And I think it's because it didn't really feel like college. It felt more like a pro stadium.
Mm-hmm. Big picture, guys. Let's talk about this because you look at Georgia, the totality of their season, okay? Demolish a Clemson team that looks like probably one of the 5 best teams in the country. They go and they have a weird first half against Alabama. It seems like Alabama just had a lot of stuff waiting for them and kind of got a little shell-shocked. Also on the road, it should be noted. And they had a really tough schedule. They go to Texas. Georgia, there's a road for them to miss the playoff. But they go down to Texas, dominate the first half. Let's just start here. That top of the league looks interesting. Is Georgia the best team in the SEC?
Well, as of now, yes.
Yeah.
As of now,
Chris, where do you stand on this?
We thought Texas was the best. And they were dethroned.
Yeah.
So I was one of those people who picked Texas to win the national championship, and I still think they can, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
I think this final score, 30-15, it was a very, very weird game because Georgia's up 23-0 at halftime, but they only had 160 yards, and 20 of those 23 points came on drives that started inside Texas's 35-yard line because of turnovers, because of a punt return. Georgia constantly had short fields and made the most of them. Texas had terrible field position and turned the ball over.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a 23-0 deficit. I'll say this. Mikael Williams just ate up Kelvin Banks in that game, the left tackle for Texas.
Couple first rounders.
Who's a first round picks, top 10 picks. Kelvin Banks looked not great. Like
that looked like a first round pick versus a fifth round pick. Like that did not look like 2 first rounders.
Yes. We'll talk about the quarterback situations in a second, but I will say Carson Beck did not play very good in this game. Georgia only finished with 4 yards per play. Like, I still have a lot of concerns about this Georgia offense. And so, yeah, they're probably the best team in the SEC now. And you can make a case for them to be number 1 or whatever, or to win the national championship. But this doesn't look like the Georgia of the last couple of years.
That's fair.
They are flawed. And the way this game played out was just they made the right plays at the right time, and that was the difference.
I think you look at this Georgia team, right? There's not a lot of like sexiness about them. Okay. There's not a Brock Bowers that just makes people go, wow. Carson Beck's got his flaws. The receivers look, Oscar Delp has been quieter than we thought. But the reason why I picked Georgia to win the whole thing is because of line play. And I thought Texas is the only team that could match up with them, but that matchup didn't quite go like we thought. Damien, what did you see in that matchup? And maybe, why did you see it playing out as one-way traffic as it did?
Well, you made a good point. That would be Georgia's offensive line. But I want to talk about ETN. I mean, he finally showed up. I mean, this was the coming out party that we've been expecting for a long, long time. We know his brother. We know they've got great football history in their family. We've been waiting to see him pop off, and he took over the game. I mean, he had 3 touchdowns, went for a hat trick. And at times, whenever this Georgia offense looked like they were stalling, throughout the Carson Beck turnovers, throughout the uncertainty of how they're going to move the ball, ETN and this offensive line were the one thing that was constant for this Georgia offense. And that kind of propels me more to make me think that Georgia is the best team in the SEC, because if Carson Beck can just cut down on the turnovers just a little bit, because one thing about Carson Beck is turnover or not, big play or not, he's going to keep throwing it. He's going to keep playing. And he's not just going to throw in the towel. I mean, we saw that against Alabama. We even saw that last night. Granted, they were up a lot of the time, but he was still making a lot of mistakes. So if he can cut down on that, just take care of the ball a little bit better with the fighter that he is, with the competitor that he is, if this offensive line keeps opening up holes for ETN and he keeps popping off like he did last night, mixed with the defense that they have, the edge rushers that they have, and clearly they cleaned up a lot of the problems in the secondary that I hit on as a concern going into this game. I mean, if they can do all of that, then, I mean, it's hard to say somebody can beat them.
Chris, let's talk about the trash. Let's talk about the trash.
Yes.
You can't do that. You can't do that. It just can't happen. I don't know. There's no other way to prevent this other than just human restraint. Like, you can't do that. You can't not sell water in a stadium. It can't happen. Didn't delay the game for 15 minutes, but hey, you can't do that, okay? And it's a problem. But from you were there, Chris. You saw some more of the context. I had kind of been halfway watching it. I had it on mute and I was writing, and then all of a sudden I saw Sark like in front of the student section looking like Moses or something. From your perspective, what went down there, and where do we kind of go from here for the sport? Because I think this can be a big problem for the sport.
So this was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen in a college football game. So Barron for Texas gets the interception and starts to return it back. Texas is down 23-8 at this point. And we see the flag come out right away because it's thrown right away. It gets returned like inside the 10-yard line. And they call pass interference on the defense, negating the interception. Crowd is not happy. Then the scoreboard at the stadium shows like a zoomed in version of the play.
Really?
How bad of a call it was.
What's a bad call?
That was a horrible call. Oh my God. It made me mad they even threw the flag in the first place. Sorry,
Chris. And that is when the crowd went nuts. And they kept showing it. And so then you have the students throwing the water bottles because everybody can see how bad of a call it was. Takes a minute to clear everything up. We're all whatever. And then all of a sudden they announce, we changed our mind. It's Texas ball. And everybody just goes berserk. And we're just like, what? You can do this? They had already announced it. They had already announced it was a penalty, and we're setting the ball and stuff like that. And so we're just like, what is going on? Texas scores a touchdown a few plays later. It's a 1-score game all of a sudden. And I'm just like, what the hell just happened? And we're trying to figure it out. We're talking to Texas communications like, hey, we need like a pool reporter here. We need someone from the media to talk to the referee to figure out what happened. And Texas tells us, we asked the league for a statement. We'll let you know. was like, oh, okay, that's the policy or something like that. But then eventually, me and a couple other reporters got together and we put out 2 questions. What was the process of which the call was overturned? And 2, what impact did the delay have on that process? The SEC put out a statement after the game, didn't answer those questions, just said some things weren't done properly, but you can't throw stuff on the field. And so the question now is, did throwing all that garbage on the field, coupled with continually showing the play on the scoreboard, did that change the officials' mind? Did they see it and there was enough time for them to change it? We don't know because the SEC didn't give us an answer on this. But Kirby Smart, rightfully, was very upset and worried about the precedent this sets, that if fans are unhappy about something, that there's a way to get the call changed by overreacting. Texas fans should not be throwing garbage on the field. They're like, that's really bad to do. Ubben, you've been involved in this before. And so I don't know what comes out of that. But Georgia fans, people around Georgia and in the program are still really mad about that.
Yeah.
We talked to some of them on the field after the game, like, game's over. You could be celebrating this win. They're still upset about that call. And so we'll see if the SEC does anything about it. But that was one of the strangest sequences I've ever seen. And I wanted to give you the context of how it played out from someone who was in the stadium.
Well, I didn't know about the zooming in. If you're, to me, if I'm the league, Texas can't be doing that either. The event staff, the people in charge of it.
Yeah.
Even if you're right. It's a terrible call. You can't be showing zoomed in, like, showing the ref screwing up on the jumbotron multiple. You can't do that.
That is something people around Georgia were upset about. They're like,
yes,
you can't upstage the officials,
yes,
and do that. And so Texas is new to the SEC. I don't know.
It's going to be interesting. Elsewhere interesting that night, we got an Arch Manning cameo. Not really on our bingo card. Chris, you were there. You talked to Sark. Sark said he did it to give him, calm his uneasiness. To me, if I'm Quinn Ewers and I get benched in a big game for Arch Manning, that's probably the one thing that would make me even more uneasy. Quinn said he didn't. You talked to Quinn after the game. What do you make of that decision and where Texas goes from here at the quarterback spot?
So Quinn gets benched. Arch Manning comes in for 2 drives, doesn't do much of anything, has a turnover. Quinn Ewers comes back for the second half. Steve Sarkisian says, we wanted to pull Quinn out, settle him down, let Arch finish the first half, come back with Quinn. So I asked Quinn, when they told you Arch was going in, did they tell you you were going to go back in? And he said no. So I said, when did you find out you were going to go back in the game? He says, in the locker room at halftime. So I don't know if there was some miscommunication there or what, but the Quinn Ewers you saw, like, really down on the sideline, that apparently was a Quinn Ewers who didn't think he was going to go back in the game. So Quinn comes out for the second half, plays better.
He was okay.
Not amazing. He was okay. But, this opens up a QB controversy for the rest of the season. Whether or not Steve Sarkisian wants that to be the case, he said after the game, Quinn's our starting quarterback. Well, okay, but now everybody knows that as soon as Quinn is not playing well, you can put Arch Manning in the game and bench Quinn. Steve Sarkisian was asked this on Thursday. What would it take to pull Quinn Ewers from a game to put Arch in? And he's like, I'm not even answering that question. I'm not even dealing with it.
He answered it on Saturday.
And then it happened 2 days later. And so this is just going to be a thing now, because if you've ever been to a Texas game this year, there are so many Arch Manning jerseys everywhere, all around the stadium. They're prominently featured in the team stores and stuff like this. Like, I felt bad.
Weirdos.
I felt bad for Quinn Ewers seeing all of that, seeing all the Arch stuff, and Quinn Ewers being in a Dr. Pepper commercial and it being about his backup. Like, I was like, I kind of feel bad for this guy. And now Steve Sarkisian did the one thing he never wanted to do, which was pull Quinn from a game for performance and put Arch in, because that is now on the table for the rest of the season.
People say A&M is weird. wearing the backup quarterback's jersey to a top 5 showdown, that's weirdo behavior. Sorry, Texas. That's weird.
It definitely is.
Damien, what's your thought on this? You lived through the Tua Jalen Hurts, situation.
The saga that was.
That went about as well as I guess you could have gone on the field. But what is that like in the locker room when there is sort of an awkwardness to try and figure out what the right move is, and everybody's got opinions, I'm sure.
Well, you use the perfect word. It's awkward. And I'll go a step further than just the locker room, but in the huddle, because, in the experience that I had with Jalen and Tua, there came a point, obviously Jalen was wonderful. He was great. He was SEC Offensive Player of the Year his freshman year, I think. I mean, he was spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
But there came a point after some time, and, we had this great young kid named Tua. There was a point in time where people started to wonder, like, I wonder if Tua gives us a little bit of a better passing attack. I wonder if, his arm, what he can do throwing the football can give us a better chance. Because keep in mind, at the time, we had a whole stable full of running backs. I mean, no offense, Jalen, we didn't need an extra running back. And once the rumbling started to get a little bit louder and a little bit louder. And I remember in that Vandy game, we absolutely demolished Vandy. Everybody played well, but Tua, the backups came in the second half of that game, and Tua was making some unbelievable plays.
I remember that.
We're like, no, this dude might be the guy. Like, we've got the guy, but he might be the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then once we started to enter the huddle with Jalen, his demeanor, I'm not going to say it was different, but like I could just tell. And as players, you can tell. So even if he's not necessarily giving off that energy, that awkward energy, you can tell because he knows that if he goes and makes a mistake, then this guy is going to get a chance. And so then you wonder if that starts to affect his play and, his style. And is he too conservative because he doesn't want to make mistakes? These are all the things that I see playing out with Quinn Ewers. I mean, he is the guy, but then we're looking at Arch Manning like, well, he might be the guy. And we know he's going to be the guy in the future. And so this is, a good problem to have, but it's bad in a sense of, what does this do for Quinn Ewers' psyche? And the way he played last night, this was my point and what I really thought of the game. I know Georgia was great, Carson Beck, ETN, they played really, really well. With Quinn Ewers, he looked so like there was no sense of urgency to the point of where like midway through the fourth quarter when they're down 2 scores and there's like 8 minutes left. And it looked like he was just like, it looked like the moment was just too big for him. It looked like he didn't have that look that he had against Alabama when he beat them in Tuscaloosa, or even the look he had against Michigan earlier in the year. He just looked like a kid that was in way over his head. And I wonder if some of that was, okay, yeah, Georgia's really getting on my ass right now. My tackles ain't holding up. But I know that if we don't keep moving the ball down the field, they're going to put Arch right back in, and my ass going to be right back on the bench. So I see that, the same similarities that I saw with Jalen and Tua, I see it kind of playing out now with Quinn and Arch. And, it's just hard because it does throw a wrench in team chemistry. And, you got some guys on the team that like Quinn, you got some guys on the team that like Arch. And in a game like last night, you don't win either way because, even when Arch went in there, he didn't really do anything to obviously keep himself in the game. And when Quinn went back in, there were a couple good plays, but, that kind of fizzled after a while. So it's a tough situation. And, I believe Sark will handle it well throughout the rest of the season, but I just worry about Quinn's mental fortitude moving forward because now it's apparent. Like you guys said, they asked Steve Sarkisian, what's it going to take for, Arch to get in? I'm not going to answer that. Well, he answered that question. So now, if a game starts to get out of hand again, you're going to be pulled. And now you start to play the game differently from the first snap. And, you never know how that's going to go. So it's a really interesting spot for sure.
Don't wear the backup quarterback's jersey to a big game. There's one exception, and that is if you are an Indiana fan, because you are going to be starting your backup quarterback, Taven Jackson, next week against Washington. However, on Saturday, Indiana dropped the hammer. Sig nasty indeed on Nebraska, 56-7. Passed a big test. We were talking about that on Thursday. I said, I want to take this team seriously, but if they can smack Nebraska, I thought smacking Nebraska would be like 31-13, not 56-7. Crazy.
Yeah.
Curtis Rourke gets hurt. I believe it's a cut on his thumb on his throwing hand.
I think he hit he hit it on a follow through. I think
if you watched him when he came back to the bench on Saturday, he had his hand very conspicuously deep in his jacket. It seems they were trying to be a little covert with that injury, but start here. Indiana, for the first time in my bubble watch, I have them probably in. Austin Mock, our bracket projections, move them up with a 61% chance to make the playoffs. So the 10 seed. Chris, are we buying Indiana as a playoff team?
This is unbelievable, man. 56-7. Like,
that was crazy.
We had said before going into this game, well, Indiana's beaten up a lot of people, but they haven't played any, real teams of note. Well, they did, and they planted them like as dominant a game as we've seen from anybody all season.
Yeah.
And I've got Indiana now up to number 11 in my rankings, a number 10 seed in the playoff. Like, Indiana in the playoff is possible, not only as an at-large, but potentially in the Big Ten picture, because they only play Ohio State from here on out. Like, they can win all the other games that they have.
Sounds like Michigan. That sounds like Michigan disrespect, Chris.
I think Michigan's doing that to themselves. This Indiana team in year one under Kurt Cignetti is unbelievable. And
he wins. He wins. The guy wins.
So, like, we'll see, like, how big of a loss Curtis Rourke is. Like, he's been getting Heisman votes from a lot of us, but the Indiana offense with Jackson and, like, still looked
really pretty good.
Really
He threw a fade route. That was awesome.
Matt Rule was, like, shell-shocked after this game. He said, like, I'll be honest, I didn't see that coming. I don't think anybody
Me either.
saw that coming. Unbelievable.
No. I want to say that's the sign. I was going to say, not to cut you off, David, that's the sign of a good team to me. You lose your starting quarterback. Well, I don't want to say lose your starting quarterback. They pulled a lot of guys when they were up big, but you always know a team is good whenever the backups, second string, the younger guys who are in there just to get some experience. When the level of play still stays up here, that's when you know you got a good team on your hands because of coaching, because of the infrastructure, because everybody that's on this team and on this roster is bought in. Like, it's not easy to do. Hell, at Alabama, whenever, our backups were going sometimes, it wouldn't always be the same standard, but to see this team, their starters playing well, Curtis Rourke, while he was in there playing well, then the backups get in, they're still out there enjoying themselves. Like, they're not just out there getting reps just for nothing. They're out there enjoying themselves, having fun, making big plays, beating the hell out of another team's starting offense and defense. So to me, that gives me genetic makeup. Like, you got a really good team, and like you've got things that you can count. Because even if you lose a guy, say you lose your quarterback, you lose a DB, a running back, you still got guys that can come in and play. So that's my 2 cents on it. I'm in on Indiana.
It's interesting because
they're going to be favored when they play Michigan. By the way, like, they're just
I think so for sure. Maybe like a touchdown or more. I still think, and we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier in the season. There's still and I don't use this word like from the tinfoil hat perspective, but just as a perception perspective, there's still a bias against Indiana. They're 7-0. They're behind 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams with a loss in the rankings. They've beaten the heck out of everybody. If they had little leaves on their helmets, or, golden wings on their helmets, or maybe an O on their helmet, or, a T on their helmet, they're in the top 5. But because people just assume that the talent's not there, I mean, listen, we can talk about talent composite, we can talk about all those things, but when you watch this team, it's not fluky, it's not smoke and mirrors. They're dynamic on the outside. They bully people on the inside. You can't run on them. They do everything well. It's crazy how good this team is. And I think I kind of like, Indiana fans are too swept up in the like euphoria of what is happening to, I think, get mad, because on some level it doesn't really matter. But the fact that they've done what they've done and they're just now sneaking in the bracket is kind of insane to me. It's just because they're Indiana and the history and all those things that goes into that. Real quick, Chris, are we wavering a little bit on Matt Rule at Nebraska?
I mean, no, but I think, hey, Nebraska's back. They beat Colorado. Dylan Rayola's the guy. Like, I think that was a little bit early. Rayola has very much, I don't want to say regressed, but he hasn't grown at the rate we thought. He is not, for all the Patrick Mahomes comparisons, he is not nearly as mobile and quick-footed as I maybe thought in my head. They're 5-2 now. Like, they should still get to a bowl game and finally end that streak. And if you do that, that is progress. But remember,
that means something.
They fell apart in the second half of last season. They lost their last 4 games when they were 5-3 at the time. You can't let that happen again. You can't do another Scott Frost here.
Yeah, and I want to piggyback off the Raiola comment just because I'm starting to learn something that's becoming a trend. I think we overanalyze, like everybody. I'm not just talking about us three on this pod, but as people in the media, fans, people who have expectations of these great quarterbacks that are coming out of high school that have zero college experience. I mean, yeah, up to week 8, but up until this point, going into the season, you're young. And we put these lofty expectations. We expect them to be the greats. We expect them to be all world. Look at somebody like Joe Burrow. I'm not gonna say he stunk it up, but his first couple years, he did nothing until he got to LSU.
Even the first year at LSU, he was like, okay.
Yeah, until he really just found his rhythm, took over the reins, and now look at him. Everybody thinks he's one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. Dylan Raiola, I'm not falling off his bandwagon. I'm not saying that he's not a good player. He's just young. He's not learning, like Chris said, at the rate that we would expect him to. I think that might be because of the program that he's at and the lack of success that they're having. But this kid's not a bad quarterback. He's going to learn. He's going to grow. He's going to turn into hopefully what we think that he can be, because I think that he does have the tools. He might not have the fancy footwork, the quick footedness like Chris had mentioned, but I still think that he has the capability of being a good quarterback at this level. So I think it goes back to what I said. Like, we just put such high expectations and we deep dive into analysis and starting to compare these guys to Patrick Mahomes and some of these greats, when again, it's like, well, this kid just got to college. Like, yeah, he's got, a couple games under his belt, but he's still young. He's a true freshman. Like, when did it become true freshmen just stepped right in and just were unbelievable? I mean, Tua didn't do that. Jalen, a guy like Jalen did, but like Caleb Williams didn't do that. Like, I can name a lot of guys that haven't done that. So he just needs time to grow. He's going to learn. I think that Nebraska has a lot of things in front of them. I think that obviously this was a really bad loss, but you can take a lot of things you can learn from it. And this is where you start to get Dylan Raiola in the mode of like, okay, we got to start progressing a little bit more. We got to start taking the check down, stop turning the ball over a little bit more. Let's start analyzing the defense a little bit better. I'm not falling off the bandwagon. I think they can, get it together, start putting together better performances.
Elsewhere in college football, this sudden Miami high wire act, I'm all in. I love it. They get the crazy Hail Mary reversed against Virginia Tech on Friday a couple weeks ago. They rally from down 35-10 to Cal on the road, win that game. And then they play a little gone in 90 seconds in a shootout against Louisville, lose a 2-touchdown lead in, I believe it's 81 seconds. That's hard to do. They found a way to do that and still won. Still 7-0, still undefeated. I will listen to debates about whether or not they are the best team in the ACC. I really want to see them play Clemson. They will not meet until the ACC championship if they both get there. Chris, what do you make of Miami to this point? And is there any chance that we don't see them in Charlotte?
I was so impressed by Miami in this game for doing what you just said, which was blowing that lead and coming back and punching back. How many times have we seen a Miami team just collapse in a tough situation on the road like that? And the fact that they just kept swinging and came out on top, that Damien Martinez run
sick
in the fourth quarter, like that's a Damien Martinez that was not there before. It's a Cam Ward that was not there before. Those are the kind of guys that were supposed to take Miami to that next level. And we see that here. In terms of Miami in the ACC championship, I mean, like, this doesn't just apply to the ACC, it applies to every conference. We are trending toward a kind of tiebreaker nightmare for conference championship games because Miami doesn't play Clemson. They don't play SMU. And I don't think they play Pitt either. All of those teams are undefeated in the ACC play right now. Like, it could get really weird at the end. I think Miami's schedule is good enough to get them there. But, like, you drop one unexpected game and it could blow up everything. So I don't know where that's going to go. But Miami, like, I'm buying them more after those last two games to rally against Cal, to punch back against Louisville. Like, that's something we haven't seen before.
Y'all are giving me heat a few weeks ago when I liked Cam over Milroe. Looks a little different a few weeks later. But Damien, what have you made? What you've seen from Cam the last few weeks, man?
Dude, this guy is unbelievable. And I have to eat my words a little bit because I talk a lot about how, Cam's greatest strength could be his greatest weakness. And the fact that, he's very casual. He's a little lackadaisical in the pocket sometimes. He's always looking for the big play. So maybe instead of checking it down or, taking a quick scramble to get in field goal range, he's looking for the big play. Well, he's damn near hitting them almost every time. I mean, he makes up for it with the clutch gene. I mean, that's something that can't be taught. It can't be coached. There's no pill you can take. There's no shake you can drink. That's just something that is in your DNA. And what was the play? There was the impressive throw that he had when he rolled out to his left and then found the guy deep in the end zone. There was another, yeah, but I don't think that was the same play. Was that the same play where he almost got strip sacked at the same time? Was that the same play or was there a different one?
I think it was a different play.
Yeah, there was another play where there's another play where he just extends and you look like, oh, he's lackadaisical. All right, you're about to get strip sacked. All right, here it comes. And then boom, just find somebody and it's the perfect spot. Big play, explosive. And I mean, hell, that negates that lackadaisical play. I do think that's still going to get him in trouble when it comes to Sundays. But we're not talking about Sundays right now. We're talking about college football. We're talking about Louisville. We're talking about the ACC. So with that being said, I mean, on top of the immense talent, on top of the, God-given ability that he just has that clutch factor, that it gene, that just like, he's got it. And that's what makes him so great. That makes Miami the best team in the ACC, in my opinion. And I don't want to get too crazy, but a team that we really have to take seriously when we talk about the 12-team playoff because of guys like Damian Martinez, because of Restrepo. Like he's got weapons too. And again, I'm gonna go back to Damian Martinez because that run, my brother, welcome. Kyle Brandt, angry runs, that should be your winner, right?
That was awesome.
But you get a really strong ground game going. And Mario Cristobal, he's an offensive line coach at heart. He likes to run the ball. He likes to be physical up front. You do that really well. You've got a quarterback that's all world, potentially a Heisman front runner. I hate to say that because, Ashton Genty's still my guy, but with a performance like that, and then you get your defense to start clicking and playing and, hold a team like Clemson to fewer points than obviously what your offense can score, you got a good shot at the ACC championship, 12-team playoff. Like they can do whatever they want. I truly think Miami controls their destiny the rest of the season.
Everybody was talking about Cam Ward's effect on Miami. Not enough people talking about Miami's effect on Cam Ward. He doesn't have to run as much. He doesn't have as much on his shoulders as he did at Washington State. It's a little bit like Jaden Daniels. You take him out of Arizona State, you put him at LSU with a bunch of guys around him. Guess what? He looks a lot better. And Cam Ward looks like a totally different player than he did at Washington State. As is tradition in the third Saturday in October, a lot of cigar smoke. At the end of the game, it's been Alabama smoking those cigars for most of the last 20-something years. But 2 of the last 3 now have been Tennessee in Neyland with the fans on the field, ripping up the turf to take home. The groundskeepers were not thrilled when I came out of postgame. Anyway, Tennessee wins 24-17. Alabama has 2 losses for the first time since 2007. 2 losses before November, for the first time since 2007, which was Nick Saban's first year. In my bubble watch, I moved them out of definitely or probably in for the first time all season. And according to Austin Mock, they play like they don't belong as well. 15 penalties, 115 yards. From me, I was there watching Tennessee. This was they still didn't score for a third game in a row, first time since 1963 that they haven't scored in the first half of 3 consecutive games. But if you watch this game, they were moving the ball. There were guys open. Nico missed a handful of throws, didn't play very well in the first half. They get the kind of fluky fumble. Dylan Sampson, you'll appreciate this, Dame. Dylan Sampson, that carry in the first quarter was his 284th career carry, first career fumble. A weird fumble. He had it was right.
Yeah.
I think he just got hit at a weird angle. I don't know. That was a weird fumble.
It happens, man. Yeah. As much as we preach about holding on to the ball, sometimes it just happens.
Yeah. And Nico has the pick when he is trying to throw the ball away and kind of got hit. They missed 2 field goals. They were in Alabama territory 4 times, didn't score. So it was a little more fluky than the Arkansas first half, the Florida first half, but still ugly. But I think that speaks to where Tennessee is as a program right now. Josh Heupel talked after the game. He said, he didn't want to talk about it, but we had some obstacles. You had the NCAA stuff. You had the roster being decimated when he got there. And they're at a place now where they feel like every Saturday they can suit up and feel like they can win. And they didn't play well against Alabama. Alabama played really poorly too. But Tennessee has played a lot of games that were not good against Alabama, and usually they lose by 20, 30, sometimes 40 points. And that was not the case. For them to play as poorly as they did and win, I think speaks pretty kindly to where the program is at. On the flip side, Damien, you've talked big picture about Alabama, but in your mind, what's going on with the Tide from what you see?
This is a very undisciplined, uncharacteristic, complacent, not hungry team. I mean, I really think that that's what it boils down to. I mean, you talk about the penalty yardage, and again, I'm not gonna belabor a dead horse, because you know what, this is what it is. It's the reality of it, and we're just gonna call it what it is. The penalty at the end of the game that turns a 4th and 7 into a 4th and 22. What did I say after the Malachi Moore situation? If you don't handle this, if you don't approach this the right way, you set the precedent that this kind of behavior is acceptable. Mm-hmm. So what do you get? In the biggest moment of the season, a guy gets a pass broken up, somebody's chirping in his ear. That's part of the game. And then what do? You lose your cool and you cost your team a 15-yard penalty and potentially a chance to win the game. And it's like, what are we doing? Where's the leadership? Jalen Milroe's the quarterback, Kalen DeBoer's the head coach, but where's the leadership? Chris, do you see any leadership on this team? David, do you see any leadership on this team? If you guys do, please let me know.
Not from what we've seen. I think they're always going to be judged by such a standard, and they're falling really short of that.
But we're not comparing them. We're not comparing them to anything other than what they are right now, which is not a good football team. I heard people say this weekend, okay, well, these aren't two great football teams like we thought they were. These are two good football teams. I would say, honestly, these were two not good football teams that played against each other. These guys were almost the same. It's almost like these two teams were staring each other in the mirror.
Yeah,
it was
a rough first half.
It was bad plays. It was missed receivers. I mean, it was fumbles, turnovers. It was everything, and somebody just had to lose, and that was Alabama. Why? Because they're undisciplined and they get themselves in a situation that you can't, what are you going to call on 4th and 22? What are you going to do? And then another thing, and this isn't even on that 4th and 22 play, love Ryan Williams to death. Great player. If you get that block, if you secure that block, you get the first down. Mm-hmm. And so it's we can't live in a world where it's okay, I just want to make the game-winning catch. I just want to make the game-winning highlight play. Sometimes you got to make the dirty play. Sometimes you got to make the dirty block, the game-changing block, or the game-changing, maybe you're the game-changing decoy or something like that. But Alabama is they're missing a lot of key components that would make them a good football team. Like I said, leadership, accountability, obviously the X's and O's, we could talk about that. Jalen Milroe, I feel, is digressing. I feel like their offense is digressing because they're utilizing less people. They're not utilizing Jam Miller, any of the running backs, Justice Haynes. They're not
19 targets. 19 targets for Ryan Williams.
19, that's crazy. And if it's not that, it's just running Jalen Milroe. And then he ran into a defense, a front four, a front seven that wasn't going to let that fly. So there's just a lot of things that Alabama needs to correct. And, I think now Kalen DeBoer and the team, they need to go back to the drawing board and be like, listen, we need to go back to square one. And we gotta reinvent ourselves. We gotta, whatever his formula is, whatever his model is, he's got to reintegrate that again and etch that in these guys' brains. And they've got to start to receive that and play to that. And if they do that, they can be a good team. Because I don't even think that this loss completely knocks their chances of getting in the playoffs. Yeah, they still realistically have a chance. Mm-hmm. So you're at a point in the season where you can regather, you can regroup, you can collect yourself and identify the things that you need to do better and then try to be better. That way you can go 1-0 every week after this, because they got a tough schedule. They got some tough matchups that they got to play the rest of the way. So, I mean, that's just where you start.
Chris, I want to get to your rankings in just a second, but Damien, I want to ask you one question.
Mm-hmm.
There were a couple guys who got off the team bus, walked into the stadium with cigars in their mouth.
Oh my God, David, I forgot about that. David, I forgot about it. And honestly, I swore to myself that I wasn't going to get worked up on this pod today talking about this game. But now that you reminded me of that just really threw me for a loop. You know why? Because I know who it was. And those were people who were there when Saban was there. There were people who played for Saban, people who coached for Saban. And I'm just sitting here really? So now, we're just totally throwing everything that made Alabama what it was out the window. We've got coaches walking into the game smoking cigars prematurely. Now I'm sure that's going to be a meme for God knows how long. I mean, what do we talk about? What has Nick Saban talked about? Just, specific to your question, David, what has Nick Saban talked about the rat poison and about feeding into the media and the narratives? I mean, he used to tell us all the time, you guys act like the team you're playing is the greatest team in the world. You respect them. You show up and you play the game the right way. Well, that's smoking cigars in the stadium just walking in off the bus. That's not that. And that's to me, that just shows the entire mentality. That's symbolic of the mentality of this Alabama football team right now. And I think that the results are what they are because of things like that.
It always felt like bad karma because I've covered this game a handful of times, and the cigars they magically appear. Nobody ever even acknowledges that they have them until the game is over. It was interesting. Chris, how far does Bama fall in your rankings, and where does Tennessee move after the win?
Bama is down to number 15 in my rankings, and it is time to really talk about Alabama not making the 12-team playoff, which is not something I at all expected coming into the season, let alone a few weeks ago when they beat Georgia. But they've got Missouri, they've got LSU. Like, it's not hard to see them losing a third game here and then really being knocked out of that picture. Tennessee, I've got up to 9, and we really need to give Tennessee a lot of credit for winning this game. Like, they went out and took that game in the fourth quarter. And Nico has been missing the deep balls for a while now, but they were open.
Yes.
And eventually he was going to start hitting some of them.
The ball he hit to Thornton on the run was one of the best throws I've seen maybe all season. That was crazy.
Yeah. And so you take that defense, which is a really, really good defense, and an offense that clearly has the pieces. It hasn't all come together, but you can see that. That's a Tennessee team that if it all clicks on the right day, could beat anybody in the country, I think. And that is what's different from this Tennessee team a couple years ago. Yes, the offense was crazy explosive. The defense was not great. They were not physical enough. Now you've got the physicality. You just got to get enough offensively. They did in that fourth quarter, and that's a huge, huge game. Tennessee's playoff chances skyrocketing after that game.
Elsewhere in people who are having a rough Sunday, we got Oklahoma, Auburn, USC, and Florida State. It's worth noting, Chris, who do we think has it worse? Who of that list jumps out to you, Chris?
So this was a thought I had, like, looking at the box scores and just seeing the way things played out. You got some historic programs here, like, down really bad. Which one is in the worst situation, or at least the one that has the fans the most concerned? I'm going to say Oklahoma. You lose 35-9 to South Carolina. You're down 21-0 in like 6 minutes of this game because you can't stop turning the ball over.
That was awful.
The offensive line is a mess because you didn't recruit it well. It stemmed from the Lincoln Riley era, but they haven't recruited it well. The portal guys haven't worked. Got all those injuries to the wide receivers. You lose offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby. You replace him with Seth Luttrell internally, and it's not working great. And the quarterback, your quarterback of the future, Jackson Arnold, who was supposed to be the guy, has been a dud. Now, maybe that's because of all the pieces around him, but this is an Oklahoma team that is probably going to get to a bowl game this year unless something dramatic happens. But you're again looking at like 6-6, 7-5 at Oklahoma, who we just talked about last week. This never happens to outside of
There's only one.
Outside of a brief stint in the late 90s, and they fired John Blake over it. But Oklahoma also gave Brent Venables a massive contract extension in the summer for no reason. Nobody was trying to hire him, as far as anybody knows. And now he's got
and 10 wins isn't that's not going to do you much at Oklahoma.
No, and he's got a gigantic Jimbo Fisher level buyout now, and you're kind of just stuck with this for a while. The defense has gotten better. Recruiting is going okay, but you have so many problems on offense right now, and this is year 3. This can't be like this at Oklahoma in year 3, that you're getting pantsed by South Carolina at home.
Damien, of Auburn, USC, and Florida State, who jumps out to you as
I got Oklahoma. Like, let's not kid ourselves. And Chris, I don't want to just echo everything that Chris said, but I'm going to say this is another team that has completely lost their identity, and you have to look at Brent Venables and say that it's his fault because of the fact that he's a defensive-minded coach. And yes, their defense is playing better, but their offense is dog sugar, honey, iced tea. They're bad. They don't have any, obviously the heritage of quarterback at Oklahoma is essentially Heisman or bust. Mentioning an Oklahoma quarterback and Heisman in the same conversation, I would say you're stupid. Like, I don't even know what what way you could even formulate that sentence. Like that's not those aren't two things that go together. They've lost that. They've lost their offensive firepower. And like to Chris's point, they're stuck with Venables because of his extension. When is he going to realize that this is his fault? When is he going to hire somebody better, a better OC, better position coaches to develop these guys? Like we said, yeah, Jackson Arnold's been terrible. He's been a dud, but is that because the receivers aren't any good? I don't doubt that they have talent, but are they not developing these guys? Like what is going on with Oklahoma's offense? It seems like a coaching problem. It seems like they're not putting these guys in the right position. They're not developing these guys. I mean, the focus is clearly just on the defense and making that better, but then you're losing the staple of what Oklahoma is. 10 wins is not enough. However many points per game they're averaging, whatever amount of yards they're averaging, it's not enough. And again, when we talk about college football, we're talking about the heritage, the prestige of what makes these universities what they are. What's their calling card? Oklahoma offense, and they got none right now. So it's not looking good for them.
Looking at the rest of these, Florida State, they lose to Duke for the first time in program history. And Duke doesn't even bother to rush the field. What an insult.
Honestly, I'm glad.
It's crazy. I was talking to some people about this last night because I said I've been at 4 consecutive games they've rushed the field. And it'd be hard to get the data, but I feel like the amount of times fans have rushed the field in the last 5 years is probably more than the 20 or 25 years before that combined. It's becoming crazy. The standards are being lowered. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm not saying don't do it, whatever. The standards are lowered. Let's all agree. And for Florida State to lose to a program for the first time in history and they don't even really mess with it, that's not great. And we also had DJ Ventura on Twitter who attempted to break the 3-2-1 Knowles curse by doing what 3-2-1 Knowles refused to do, and I don't know that it's going to work, so we'll see. Also, at USC, you've got a lot more expectation there. I don't think that people were looking at this as a peak year after you lose Caleb Williams, but a bid in the playoff was definitely possible. And yet, here we are. USC has now graduated to being, I still think, the best 3 and 4 team in America. I don't know if they hang banners for that at the Coliseum. I don't think they do. But our colleague Antonio Morales pointed out that USC has now blown 14-point leads in back-to-back weeks, and Lincoln Riley has lost 12 games as USC head coach. In 5 of those losses, they have lost 14-point leads. That's
unbelievable.
That's hard. That's hard to do. That is hard to do. What is this?
Yeah.
Year 3 for him there? So,
Yep, same as Venables.
Up 21-7 at halftime over Maryland and 28-14 in the fourth quarter.
And
Maryland puts 15.
You can't kick a field goal. Like if you just kick the field goal, you win the game. The field goal gets blocked. It's returned. Maryland comes down. Like the amount of things that have to go wrong for UST to blow these games is unbelievable. And
it's crazy.
And they do it every time.
Auburn, they lose a game to Missouri on the road. They're up 14 with Brady Cook injured. He goes to the hospital for an MRI. Reportedly told the staff, I've only got 2.5 games left on Furrow Field. I'm not missing this one in the hospital. Shout out to Mizzou, who had the foresight to build a hospital across the street from the stadium. I don't think they did that specifically for Brady Cook. I think it's been there a long time. But I will say the only saving grace for Auburn right now, despite Hugh Freeze, now has losses to New Mexico State and Maryland last year, and then Cal and Oklahoma with a freshman quarterback in South Carolina, is you can at least reasonably point to Brian Harsin and say, look what this guy did. The counterpoint to that, our guy Sig Nasty exists. Sig Nasty is ruining everything for coaches because he inherited a rough situation and there is no patience. Because whatever you say, if you are any of these coaches, Indiana has every excuse in the world and they're sitting on top of the world at this point. The 12-team playoff is inching closer and closer. We're going to get the first CFP rankings in about 10 days. Same night as election night. Should be fun. The playoff field, Chris, you put yours as part of your Athletic 134. If the season ended today and you were sitting in that very well-catered conference room in Grapevine, what does Chris Vannini's playoff field look like at this point?
So we have the same 4 as we've had before. Number 1, Oregon. Number 2 seed, Georgia. Number 3 seed, Miami. Number 4 seed, BYU. Haven't moved off of that. 5 seed, Penn State against 12 seed, Boise State.
Hello.
Matchup would be a lot of fun. Aston Genty against that Penn State defense.
Give it to me.
Number 6 seed, Ohio State against number 11 seed, Indiana. which would be a rematch. Things are going to change. But technically, the committee has no rules against doing rematches in the playoff. That's what they say. Are they going to follow through on that? I don't know. We've never had this.
Well, it's not like they're casting a television show that's trying to get the biggest ratings possible, Chris. They have no motivation to avoid rematches, right?
I'm going to assume we're not going to get rematches, even if it may seem like that's going to happen. Then we've also got number 7 seed Texas, 10 seed Clemson, and then 8 seed LSU versus 9 seed Tennessee, which is an SEC game, but not a rematch. So,
first of all, I would like to apologize to Iowa State fans on behalf of Chris. He hates you. Please send all your hate mail to Chris.
Here's what happened to Iowa State, though. This is the thing with the rankings, though. Tennessee and Indiana jumped them. And LSU might have as well. Because Iowa State needed to come back and barely beat a UCF team that's not very good right now. So, and when Tennessee beats Alabama and LSU destroys Arkansas and Indiana does what it does, these things change week to week. So Iowa State's still very much there. Don't worry, Iowa State fans. You'll be okay.
Again, that's at Chris Vannini for all your hate mail. Austin Mock's playoff field. His model is really interesting. He's got number 1 Oregon, number 2 Miami, number 3 Georgia, number 4 Iowa State. You're welcome, Cyclones. And then his the first round matchups would be Boise going to Ohio State, number 6 seed Penn State hosting 11 seed Tennessee in Happy Valley. That would be quite a scene. And Texas hosting Indiana. And then the 8-9 game would be Notre Dame hosting Clemson. I feel like we've seen that game like 8 times in the last 3 years. That'd be interesting. Again, BYU fans, you can send your hate mail to Austin Mock for not including your 7-0 team in his model. But it's an interesting field. And I think that for all the hand-wringing and all the conversation about the playoff and all that stuff, I think the core of all of this is we're trying to find a national champion. And I don't care that much about number 13. I'm sorry. But this event is going to be awesome.
You know who cares about number 13, and that is Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti.
Yes, I'm writing about this, yeah.
They are going to force up a big storm if you've got a 3-loss or even a 2-loss Big Ten or SEC team that gets left out, while a 3-loss ACC, a 2-loss G5 team gets in. That is why they want automatic bids, or at least the Big Ten does, and a larger playoff field to help their teams. And there's a lot of pressure on the committee to set the precedent here on what happens moving forward.
It's
going
to be fascinating.
If you have a field, without SEC Big Ten teams, that's more likely going to speed up a change to the playoff.
This is going to be. I mean, I really can't wait for that first committee rankings and the chairman kind of explaining that. Anyway, guys, it's time for the Heismans and Criesmans of the week. Chris, what was the best thing you saw this week?
I give my Heisman to Michigan State, which beat Iowa 32-20. And they didn't punt in the entire game against Iowa, a really good defense. They attempted 7 field goals, and they made 6 of them. So they were consistently putting together good drives. Aiden Childs, who's been a turnover machine, was much better, played very well. Now Michigan State's 4-3. Bowl game looks possible. And you've got Michigan coming in off of that loss to Illinois. They're 4-3 going in the opposite direction right now. It's going to set up a really, really interesting Michigan State rivalry game next week with a lot on the line. Michigan it's not looking good. They lose to Illinois 21-7. They have no answers whatsoever. And I saw someone make a case, Ohio State lost the rivalry with Michigan because it decided to promote an unqualified assistant from within to replace a national championship winning coach. And now is Michigan doing that exact same thing? I think it's a bit early, but Michigan was not prepared for year one under Sharon Moore. Michigan State, year one, Jonathan Smith, looked pretty good.
Mm-hmm. Damien, what was the best thing you saw this week?
My Heisman moment was Maryland, but not just because they beat USC, because the celebration. Y'all saw the celebration after the final knee. Quarterback kneel down, turn around, throw the lob, turn it to the hoop for your boy to dunk it through. That was nice. That was
good.
Listen, we've seen a lot of celebrations this year. We've seen a lot of bad ones. We've seen a lot of inappropriate ones. Some that aren't TV friendly, that aren't
there was less murder
friendly.
In this one. This was good.
right. That phenomenal game, great win, even better celebration. Love it, Maryland.
The best thing I saw this week Can't believe I'm going to do this.
Uh-oh.
First career start, DJ Lagway completes 7 passes for 259 yards. And Florida demolishes Kentucky by 28 points. Here's the thing. Everybody was leaving Billy Napier for dead. And I still think the odds are definitely heavily in favor of him not coming back. But if you look at the totality of what he has done, okay, ugly loss at home to Miami, but Miami hasn't lost. Texas A&M hasn't lost an SEC game. They lose that game by 13. They lose in overtime on the road to Tennessee. That's 3 playoff teams. I'm not saying you should keep him. I'm not saying that that's the right move, but I'm just saying it's getting kind of interesting in Florida, and this kind of thing can happen when you drag your feet on making a move.
Their last 3 games have been maybe the best 3-game stretch of Napier's career as coach.
Yeah.
However, their next 4 games are Georgia, Texas, LSU, then Ole Miss, and Florida State.
Here we go. Good luck.
If you have any chance of actually saving Billy Napier's job, it has to happen now.
Yes, indeed. Chris, what was the worst thing that you saw this week?
I'm going to go with Arizona State coach Kenny Dillingham. Arizona State loses 24-14 to Cincinnati.
Last week.
He was. Right. It's a big drop down.
Life comes at you fast.
Sam Levitt didn't play in the game, but they missed 2 field goals, missed them badly.
Yeah.
And a frustrating Dillingham after the press conference says, if you're at Arizona State and you can kick, email me. We're going to have tryouts. We're going to try to get some people on board, which is not unprecedented.
Yeah, we've
lots
seen it
of coaches have done this before. But also Kenny Dillingham then apologized for it on Twitter and said, no, the loss has fallen on me. I shouldn't do that. But I had to give him the Criesman because it kind of literally was kind of crying about his field goal situation, which was not great. Still having a good season, but you're going to need to do better at kicking for sure.
Damien, other than Alabama, what was the worst thing that you saw this week?
Well, honestly, I'm going to go outside of the Alabama team, but my Criesman are going to be the Alabama donors and Alabama boosters and the higher ups, the people that pour all this money into the university. Nick Saban, I want you guys to hear me closely. Nick Saban was not lying when he sat on national TV and said, Tennessee is our biggest rival. You never had to get guys up for this game. Auburn, maybe, some guys would be a little sleepy. Georgia, Tennessee, that is the most important game of the year, not only to the players, not only to the coaches, but again, the fans, the donors, the people who pour so much love, support, and money into this prestigious university. And for them to start to see the tide of this rivalry start to turn, like you said, Ubben, when I never in a million years would have thought that I would have heard that Tennessee won 2 of the last 3. Yeah. Alabama donors and boosters, I'm sorry. It's tough for all of us. So, but really, you're spending your hard-earned money. I'm sorry.
And Alabama had to erase a 2-touchdown halftime deficit last year just to win that game in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah.
My Criesman of the week, a great man once said, it was all good just a week ago. The Calgorithm. I don't know if you've checked in lately.
Well, it wasn't good a week ago either, but
it's the Calgorithm has contracted a virus, and I don't know what to tell them. It started 2 weeks before that Miami game. They lose to Florida State. They give Florida State their only win of the year. Then they blow a 35-10 lead to Miami. Then they lose by 2 to Pitt. And then yesterday, lose 24-23 to NC State. I believe they were winning that game by a decent amount. Anyway, the Calgorithm that went from 3-0 with a win over Auburn to 3-4, and the schedule opens up here. I think they'll still get to a bowl game. They have Oregon State at Wake, Syracuse, Stanford, and at SMU. But a once promising season for Cal looks.
Did you realize Cal is 0-4 in ACC play, having been outscored by 9 points?
That's tough.
And they have missed field goals the last 2 weeks that could have won them the game. So they're right there.
This is why I've been saying we need to. You if you have good memes, you should start the game with like a 3-0 lead. Like we've had the Calgorithm gave us some of the best memes that we've seen in the sport in quite some time, and it hasn't done anything for them on the field. And I think we should think about changing that. That's all I'm saying. Guys, thank you for listening. It's a fun show. Quite a week of football. Every Saturday we see it. Please consider subscribing to the podcast. Apple, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. We publish 3 a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays throughout the college football season. And subscribe to the podcast. It doesn't just help us, it helps you too, because anytime we have a new episode, it goes straight to your device. We're going to hit your eardrums very quickly as soon as we're there. And leave us a review. Any support from you listening is greatly appreciated. Check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/untilsaturday and call the Until Saturday phone line and leave us a voicemail for our Monday reaction show, 316-462-9852. And check out the Until Saturday newsletter as well. Jana Bardal does a great job with that, and it's free. It's always nice. You can find the links to that newsletter, our YouTube channel, everything in the show's description. For Chris Vannini and Damien Harris, I'm David Ubben. Thank you for listening. We will talk to you on Wednesday. And as always, bring back the turnover chain. Keep the cigars hidden until the game is done. See you next week.